What's goody? Hey man, so there's this idea that's been coming up about like should the NBA start doing non-guaranteed contracts, kind of like the way that football, the NFL does non-guaranteed contracts, right? Where it's like there will be a portion of your contract that's guaranteed, but then a lot of it is incentive based, it's based on team performance, it's based on bonuses and stuff like that, right? And basically, the basis for this idea is that we have stars now that are getting entitled. We have players that are out here, they're missing games when they could be playing. They're going out they're sitting out for minor injuries, or they'll get a minor injury in a game and they won't play the rest of the game and they'll be out for a little bit because of it. And a great example is Paul George with that sprained finger on his non-shooting hand thing, where he went out at like halftime or something and he didn't return for the rest of the game. Like, let's be serious right now, bro. Like, so it's an idea that's been coming up, and the first thing I want to say with this idea is that I'm not necessarily sure how realistic this is. Because one, I don't know how you'd be able to get the NBA Players Association to agree to it, and I'm assuming that they would probably have to agree to it for it to work, so I'm not really sure how you can get that to happen. But then also, I don't know how that would work with guys who have like what I'm assuming would happen would that it would be something that the NBA would implement, and for guys that already have contracts in that season. So let's say the NBA implemented that this offseason, right? And it started for contracts that were signed next season or this offseason and forward. That's what I would assume would have to be the kind of implementation process would be. They would implement it in an offseason, and then they would say, okay, from this offseason going forward, every contract does not have to be fully guaranteed. They can leave it up to the team or whatever. But now we have the option for contracts to not be fully guaranteed. But then guys that were already under contract for like Paul George this offseason signed a 4-year deal, right? His 4-year deal would still be fully guaranteed until 2030, till 2020, whatever it is, 2027, 2028, whatever his deal is, right? So that's the way I'm assuming it will work, because guys have deals that are already in place. So those current deals would have to already be honored, right? That's something that you just aren't going to get these players to budge on. Rightfully so. They shouldn't budge on that. So that's the way that I would assume it would be implemented. But now that we've gotten kind of through the logistics of all of it and the fact that it might not be realistic, but then also the fact that there's problems with the way the NBA might have to think about implementing it, let's just talk about the idea itself. Now, I am a person that believes that the way that certain people like Paul George, like Joel Embiid, like these type of guys, maybe even a Zion Williamson, like these type of guys who kind of seem to be a little bit entitled. Now with Zion, it seems to be one of those things where he necessarily have the motivation with like his body and everything like that. Like his body just wasn't agreeing with him because of the way he was eating, because of the way he wasn't conditioning, because of the way he wasn't really taking care of his body during the first couple of years of his season. Now that he's in better shape, it kind of just looks like his body might just be not agreeing with him, that explosiveness and everything like that. But for guys like Joel Embiid and Paul George, where if you're Joel Embiid, were hurt for most of last season, you had an historic start to the season, then you get hurt, you miss a whole bunch of games, and then you're out for a significant period of time, and then you come back for the playoffs, but you're kind of limping your way into the playoffs. You're having some weird, like, Bell's palsy, like, crazy type of injuries that nobody could ever predict or do anything about, right? But then you limp your way into the playoffs, you get first-round exit by New York, everything like that happens, right? But then you go into the summer and you choose to play in the Olympics, which is something that doesn't necessarily correlate, because it's like, okay, well, if you're going into the summer and you're going to play the Olympics, that tells me that you should probably be 100% fully healthy, right? So that's great. Everything like that is cool. Okay, perfect. That gets Sixers fans excited because they're like, perfect. He's 100% healthy. He's warming his body up by playing in the Olympics. He's going to be ready to go when the season starts. And then the season starts and you're not ready to go. The season starts and you're injured, and you've been injured on and off throughout the season. And now that you're playing, you're not injured, but you're playing like ass. So it's a bad look for you, but it's also a bad look for the NBA. It's a bad look for the organization, and we are seeing increasingly more and more of these type of things happening, where we see guys like Paul George who play 70-something games in a contract year, but then the very next year, they're sitting out with sprained fingers and stuff after they get their bag. After they finesse another team into paying them what they want, they're sitting out with minor injuries, and they're playing like ass, right? Where you're uploading more podcast clips than you have field goals made for your new team, even though you're making $200-something million, right? So that's the reason that the idea has even come up, because we see guys in the NFL where you see guys playing through injuries from week 1, especially through the playoffs. Like by the time week 8 hits, every single player that you see playing on an NFL field is banged up. Every single NFL team has an injury report for a game where it's like 20 guys questionable at the very minimum. But a lot more often than not, unless an injury is super serious, we see guys play through that in the NFL. And a lot of that is because They get paid more if they get certain stats at the end of a season. They get paid more if their team has a certain record at the end of the season. We see these incentives where it's like you see guys that need 50 more receiving yards to get an extra $1 million, or you see guys win the Super Bowl, they get an extra $1 million or an extra however many millions of dollars, right? We see that, and that is a thing that I believe the NBA could really use. That is a thing that I believe the NBA could really learn from, and that is why I personally am behind the idea of the NBA trying to implement these non-guaranteed contracts. Now, again, could it cause some problems? For sure. Would some fans not be behind it? For sure. Would players absolutely do an outcry? For sure, because all they've ever known is guaranteed contracts. So these players would definitely start crying and whining about it. Would the NBA Players Association agree to it? Players Association agree to it? Probably not. But that doesn't mean that it's something the NBA shouldn't try to do. The NBA right now is a dying product. It is a product where the presentations seem to get worse and worse with ESPN and with the All-Star break, with Turner and everything like that, even though it's going to be NBC next season, and we're excited to see what NBC can do, because NBC is historically a network that loves basketball, that just kind of treats basketball the way that we as fans want basketball to be treated. They broadcast it in a way that we as fans want it to be broadcasted, and we've also seen them hiring talent. So we're excited for stuff like that. But the biggest problem with a lot of the NBA, and especially with the regular season, is that we just don't see guys playing. It's hard to create a rivalry between teams or between players when 2 out of the 4 times those teams match up in a year, the star guys aren't playing. It's like, well, yeah, it's a rivalry, but it's fucking role player on role player out there. Like, it's not real rivalry because we don't see certain guys playing a lot of the time in these regular season matchups, especially like we've seen Embiid duck Jokic in Denver multiple times before, where he was perfectly healthy before the game and then randomly an hour before tip-off he's out. You know what I'm saying? Like, we've seen these things happen. Not to dunk on Joel Embiid. I'm just using him as an example because this is a guy that is an MVP. This is a guy that was just a starter on the highest stage of basketball in the Olympics, or one of the highest stages of basketball in the Olympics, definitely the highest global stage of basketball in the Olympics. But then he comes out for the season and he's not healthy. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we see these things, and these players are the types of players that we need to hold accountable. We need to hold these players to the standard. I'm not one of those people that's going to be like, I'm not holding Joel Embiid to a LeBron standard, to a standard of a Kobe or whatever. Yes, I am. Once you win that MVP award, you get held to that standard of former MVPs. I don't care if those MVPs end up being the greatest player of all time, a top 5 player of all time, a top 10. I don't care. None of the above. I do not care. When you get to that MVP level, once you win that MVP, I am going to compare you to other MVPs. I'm going to compare and contrast what they did with what you did. And I don't care if the eras are different, because the reason that a lot of fans fell in love with that era of basketball isn't just nostalgia. It's because we saw guys playing through this stuff. We built up genuine rivalries between teams and between players. We built that stuff up. Those players built that up by playing against each other time and time and time again in the regular season and in the playoffs, and they gave us these moments when they did so. That is something that can't happen when you have guys sitting out half the games in the regular season at 29, 30 years old saying, I'm not going to play a single back-to-back for the rest of my career. You won't? LeBron James just dropped 40 on the second night of a back-to-back, and he was the leading scorer for the Lakers the night before. At 40, you can't do it at 30? You just won an MVP 2 years ago. Your team has questions about your health every single year. Fans are starting to boo you in your own home city. You're losing to the Raptors, a bad team. You're losing to the Nets, a worse team, even when you're fully healthy, because you're not playing to your abilities. You're not playing to what we know you are capable of playing. So you can't be mad that the fans are mad at you. It's not all fun and games and jokes and shit when you're doing what you're doing. You were not an all-star this year because of your injuries. You had the entire all-star break to rehab, recover, do whatever you needed to do, take a mental break, a physical break, whatever you needed to do. And then you come back, and in the first game, you drop 15 points. Y'all lose by 20 against the Celtics. You dropped 15 points. Paul George hasn't scored 20 in a month. He dropped 17 yesterday and was your leading scorer. Non-guaranteed contracts would make it so these players at least have an incentive. We would see that these players will start to feel it in their pockets, because that's the only way you can make them feel it is with the money. If their money isn't hurting, they aren't going to give a damn. That's what we've seen in this new NBA and this new era and everything like that, is if their pockets aren't hurting, they are not going to give a singular damn. Well, guess what? The way to make their pockets hurt, start making those contracts non-guaranteed. Start seeing what happens when you have a team like Philly, a team that was supposed to be a true contender in the East. Now you're the fucking 11 seed, losing to the Celtics, losing to the Raptors. Well, the Celtics are a great team. I'm not mad at you for losing to them. But you lose to the Raptors, you lose to the Nets when your team's fully healthy. Not fully healthy, but all 3 of your stars are there. That cannot happen. Should not happen. And we would see these players start to give a little bit more of a damn. And now there's the people who say, well, what happens when they try to play through a major injury? I'm not asking for you to try to play through a torn ACL. But when you have a sprained finger on your non-dominant hand, you should play through that. If you have a sprained finger on your dominant hand, you should try to play through it. I'm not saying you need to go out there and give me your best performance when you have a sprained finger. I'm not saying you need to go out there and drop 50 when you're still recovering from an ankle sprain or from calf soreness or hip soreness or whatever it is. I am not saying that. What I am saying is that we as fans would at least like to see you try. The organization would at least like to see you try. Hell, when you're making $250, $300 million a year, I would like to see you try. The average American that's making $60K a year, F that, would like to see you try. When the average American that's making 60 bands, again, F that, is paying 2 bands for a seat on a random night to go watch you hoop, we are expecting those superstar players to play. Now, if a player's been out for a month and you still buy those tickets, that's on you. But if you're not listed on that injury report the night before, the morning of, we are expecting you to play come game time. I'm not expecting you to just randomly duck Jokic because you're playing in Denver. I'm not expecting that. So let me know what y'all think about it, man. It's a very interesting topic, and it's definitely a controversial one. Again, I'm not sure how realistic it is, but it is something I would like to see the NBA explore. And yeah, man, just please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Helps me out a lot, helps the channel out a lot. And yeah, let me know what y'all want to see. Let me know what content y'all want to see. But other than that, we out, man.